everyone. I am Devin Graham. I'm the president of the Humanists of Tallahassee, and on behalf of HOT, UUCT, the Free Thinkers Forum, and the Secular Student Alliance at FSU, I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight to hear Dave Warnock. I'm sure you've all heard his story to some extent, maybe. But Dave is a former evangelical minister who deconverted a few years back now and was diagnosed with ALS 4 years ago now, right? And so he's here to talk about his life and whatever else he wants to talk about. So we are going to let him speak, and we'll take questions at the end. Okay. Thank you. That was brief enough.
That was right. And you got all the facts right. I did it. Okay. Yeah, all these mics, I'm at a news conference, and I'll take questions at the end. But thank you for coming out to hear me tonight. I appreciate everyone. I'm going to move back and forth because the mics are kind of obscure some of you, and I love to make eye contact. So that's why you'll see me moving around. I'm not swaying because of my ALS. I don't do that yet. That's maybe coming. I don't know. But I am sitting down because standing is hard and it's getting harder. But I'll talk more about that in a minute. Sorry. That's also another thing I have to do is have water while I'm speaking because my voice gets dry. The ALS has kind of taken that as well. All these different groups coming together, I appreciate that. How many of you are from the Secular Student Alliance? Do we have anybody? SSA? I know that those are okay. I know I've worked with a couple of SSA chapters, and I'm actually going to be speaking at the SSA conference this summer, and I'm really excited about that because I'd like to see the groups that have brought me into campuses. I've found that they're fairly small groups, and I'm really anxious to see what can happen to get those bigger, get those more active and powerful, because that's where the strength is. That's where the future of this country is. It's not us old people. We're dying out, and we're dinosaurs. And so we've got to get the young people involved and active, and I'm always happy to see that happen. So thanks for doing what you do with them, Devin. But thank you for having me. As she mentioned in the intro, I'll go over a little bit of my story, and then we'll talk about what we're doing and what we have going on this year that we're very excited about. As I'm doing this pretty lady in the front row that is infatuated with me enough to film it is my partner, Bevan. Y'all say hi to Bevan. She gets me everywhere I need to go and does all the hard work to get me here. And she has a lot on her. It was funny, we met Devin. I'm Dave, and that's Bevan. So I guess we're Devin as well. Yeah. What's the two things that all of us in here have in common? Think about it a minute. Everyone in here has two things in common. We've all been born. Obviously, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't been. And we're going to die. You guessed it. Everyone in this room is going to die. I hope that's not a shock to any of you. I hope that's not new information. It's the thing we're all going to do, but none of us really talk about it much. And most of us don't like to think about it much. But since I was diagnosed with ALS about 4 years ago, as Devin said, almost exactly 4 years ago, February 26th of 2019. Since then, I have been doing a thing called Dying Out Loud, and it's what I've been talking about almost exclusively, is dying. And conversely, along with dying, is I've been talking about living. Because in the gap between when we're born and when we die is the thing called living, which is what we have to do. None of us chose to be born. None of us picked the family we were born into, the place we were born, the environment into which we were born, the political leanings of the family we were born into. None of us chose. And as we get older, turn from children into adolescents and then adults, we start beginning to get to choose what that life looks like. Now, many of us I don't know how many of you in here were once evangelical or fundamentalists like I was, but for those of us who came out of that, however we got into it, whether it was imposed upon us by our parents or whether we got into it as a teenager like I did, looking for something to belong to and something bigger than myself, however we got into it, if we were into that worldview system, the fundamentalist evangelical system, we were then told everything to do. We were told how to live, what to think, how to think, not how to think, but what to think and what to do and rules to live by. And we weren't able to live by our own standards. If we tried to do that, then we got out of step with the norm, and then we got into trouble, which is what I was always doing, because I was always asking questions about why this, why that. I know Deloise mentioned she first contacted me after reading my book, Childish Things, my memoir, which regrettably we didn't bring any with us because we've been on a vacation prior to this and we're not thinking clearly. So if at the end of any of you want that, we can make arrangements. You can buy them on Amazon, but some people like signed copies. We can help you get that. But she read my memoir and contacted me, and that's how we ended up being here through a series of conversations back and forth. But in my book, I detail in great detail and at great length the process through which my life got from being in a highly controlled evangelical worldview to becoming an atheist and a free thinker and a humanist and an agnostic and all those things. And it was a long, lengthy, arduous process where I had to do what they call deconstruct my faith. Prior to anyone deconverting, you have to first deconstruct, which means you take it apart piece by piece. You start evaluating this thing that you believe and that thing that you believe, and what about this doctrine? What about that doctrine? Original sin, the concept of hell, exclusive faith, like we're the only faith. All those things you have to think through. If you start questioning those things, you usually question them piece by piece. Like you're deconstruct. If we were to deconstruct this building, you would first start taking fixtures out, and then you would take glass out, and then wood, and then down to the studs and the rafters and things. That's how I deconstructed my faith. That's how anyone deconstructs their faith, piece by piece, doctrine by doctrine, idea by idea. And then when you get down to the bare bones, you start to evaluate what's left. For me, there was nothing left. It was just a complete exit from faith, a complete exit from Christianity, a conclusion I came to, not a decision I made. And it was simply this: I was wrong. I came to the stark realization that for over 35 years, I'd been wrong about a basic concept of what life is and what life isn't. And it's a tough thing to admit that for the better part of your adult life, you've been wrong about something that fundamentally important. But I did. And once I realized that I no longer believe in the God of the Bible, I no longer believe in a supernatural deity of any kind, then it was just simply a matter of saying, okay, now what am I? What do I believe in? And that's when you begin to reconstruct. You begin to say, okay, now what are the values upon which I want to build my life? Because I no longer can adhere to the biblical values that I tried to live by for 37 years or so. And so I reconstruct myself. I called myself an agnostic at first because that's an easier thing to do. It's kind of a little soft landing place, if you will. The atheist word is so scary. And when you tell people you're an atheist, they jump back like you are going to try to harvest their organs and eat them because you're evil and you believe in Satan and all those things that they're so confused about. So I didn't use that word for a while, but then I realized, you know what? I kind of have to, because that's the truth. The term atheist simply means I don't find enough evidence to believe in a God of any kind, and so I'm an atheist. I'm not a theist, I'm an atheist, an atheist. It's not a worldview, it's not a standard of living, it's just simply the answer to the God claim, period. That's it. It's nothing to be afraid of. But what am I beyond that? I'm a humanist. I'm a free thinker. In other words, no one's going to tell me any longer, ever again, what to think. I'm going to think on my own terms and live on my own terms. So if I'm going to call myself anything, it's going to be a humanist. An agnostic simply means I don't know. So you can be an agnostic atheist, an agnostic Christian, an agnostic theist, an agnostic humanist. It's just a word that pretty much describes the human condition. Because if we're honest, none of us know about anything. And as soon as we declare that we know, we're in trouble. Because we have to keep asking questions and keep being curious. So if I have to define my value system, it's humanism. I believe in the value of humans. I believe that we have the answers. I believe that we are dependent upon one another, and we take credit when we do something right, and we take the blame when we do something wrong. We don't get to pass it off to a demon that made me do it if it was bad, or a God that did it for me if it was good. And that's what happens in the spiritual world. So I believe we're all responsible for ourselves, the choices we make, and how we treat each other. And I think humanism is the best value that any of us could live by. I believe in the inherent value of humans. So as I came to that conclusion, I had to just embrace it, and I shared it with people that were in my life, family members, friends, that I felt like deserved to know the truth about me. I could no longer present myself as someone who they think is a Christian if that's not who I am. So that went about as well as you might expect it to. Lost a lot of friends, lost family members, some of them still disconnected from me. But what I gained was the freedom to be myself and the authenticity, to live the ability to live an authentic life, be true to myself, make no apologies for anything. And it has been an amazing way to live. I've been living this life since 2011, so that's about 12 years now. And I've gotten to know some incredibly amazing people. And I've been able to forge a life that I'm proud of and not apologetic. Yeah, do I make mistakes? Well, there was once back in 2000, what was that, 18, I made a mistake. No, I make lots of mistakes, and we all will because we're humans, and that's okay. But when I make a mistake, when I do something bad, when I lose patience or lose my temper, I just simply acknowledge, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have acted that way. I don't need to ask God to forgive me. I don't need to repent because there was no sin committed. Those are made up things. Sin, repentance, those are religious and spiritual words. They're not real words in the real world. None of us are sinners. I hope y'all know that. None of us have sinned. That's something that religion makes up to make us feel bad, to control us, and to try to shame us and guilt us into behaving and falling into line. Hell no, don't fall into line. Always color outside the lines. That's where the fun is. As I came to those conclusions, I about 5-6 years into that, I got the diagnosis that I have ALS. That is when the Dying Out Loud organization that some of you may have heard about. It's not an organization, it's just something we started doing. It's a brand, if you will, that someone came up with. We still don't know who. And we started calling it Dying Out Loud, and I started traveling and speaking like this, going on a lot of podcasts, YouTube shows, just getting my message out. And what is my message, you might ask? It's simply this, and I'll try to summarize it in just a few lines, if you will. Refreshing pause. We have one life. In fact, it's summarized well in this poem. I think it is attributed to Confucius, but it's also the closing line of a poem that someone sent me shortly after my diagnosis. The poem is called My Soul Has a Hat, and it's by Mario de Andrade, a Brazilian poet in the 40s, I believe. And the final line says this: we have two lives, and the second begins when you realize you only have one. Now, for those of you that have always been atheists or humanists, that may not seem revelatory. But for a former Christian, it's a huge change and shift in your mindset. Christians are taught that there's an afterlife, that this life is simply a warm-up. It's a dress rehearsal. It's a preseason game. And it's not the life that matters. It's just to prepare us for eternal life, either in heaven or in hell. Some religions don't really buy into the hell idea, but almost all think there's a heaven of some sort. Almost all religions ascribe, other than Judaism, as far as I know, and maybe Hinduism, but I don't know much about them. I'm just spitballing here. Most religions buy into the concept of an afterlife, of going to heaven when you die. You're in a better place. You're going to see grandma. You're going to see your nephew, whatever. And that's what keeps people invested in many ways. It's fear in some cases, and it's hope in other cases. When you come to the end of that ideology and you realize this is it, this is the one life we have, what are you going to do with it? If there's one message that summarizes what I've been talking about for the last 4 years, it's that. You have one life, and you get to decide how to live it. No one's telling you how to live it, and there's freedom in that, but there's also responsibility. And it can be a little bit heavy, because what if you blow it? What if you don't live the life you want to live? It's on you. There's no excuse. What if you're getting close to the end, like I am, and you're thinking, okay, what have I not done that I should have done? What do I want to do? How do I want to end this thing? How do I want to close out the chapters of my life? How do I finish this story? Essentially, what it boils down to is that prior to becoming an atheist, prior to ending my faith, I was letting other people write my story. I was letting a God, I was letting Christian leaders, I was letting the demands of family members, I was letting everyone else but me write my story. I did not have the pen in my hand. So when I kicked faith to the curb, I like to say I did that instead of losing my faith. Losing can be a passive thing that happened to you. I said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. When I did that, then I took the pen back and I said, you know what? I'll finish this story. And then ALS came along, and ALS tried to write my story. ALS tried to finish it for me. And it's still trying to do that every day, not every day. It's the kind of disease, at least for me, where you don't realize the things you're losing on a daily basis. It's just like on a weekly or monthly basis, or every couple of months, I'll realize, well, I can't do that anymore, or this is getting harder. And sometimes it happens kind of suddenly where, well, that finger quit working. And it just happens that way. Like I lost my thumb on my right hand, I don't know, a couple months ago. It just like, it worked one day and the next day it didn't. And the way that is the muscles are atrophying, and they're essentially the nerves are telling the muscles what to do, and the muscles are rebelling and saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Fuck you. And so gradually they all quit work. Can you say that here? I'm sorry. I know we're in a church. It's too late now. Gradually they quit working. And so you lose 20%, 30%, 40%. And then you hit a tipping point where you had enough muscles in that particular part of your body to do a certain thing, like grip or raise my arm. That left a long time ago, or walk, kind of a big thing. And then all of a sudden you've lost enough muscle in that area where there's not enough left to do the thing. Does that make sense? And so all of a sudden, it's not like the thumb went out all of a sudden. It's like that last 2% of muscle loss or whatever was enough to cause it to say, nope, we're done. And then you realize, my God, I needed that thumb. You've heard the term opposable thumbs? It's a real thing. So now I'm down to what the animals who don't have opposable thumbs. I'm just swinging along like this. And you have to make adjustments. And you have to say, okay, now how am I going to get along? And then it requires Bevan to do more things for me. And if I'm around, we just were at a vacation with a bunch of friends, and, others will come up and say, hey, can I help you? And Bevan's busy, doing something for someone else in the house. And so someone helps feed me. And takes a village, as they said. And so all those things contribute to take my life away in a very slow, gradual, difficult way. And you're just watching your life disintegrate in front of you. This shirt, one of our graphic artists that donates his time to us came up with this design, a dying out loud design, and it looks like my head's exploding, doesn't it? It can be a little jarring, but this disease is jarring and it's not pretty. And so the graphic is designed in that way to call attention to that. It's not a pretty thing. We're not going to make a butterfly and sunset design, because that's not what this is. And so what it also captures is the reality that, yeah, my body is disintegrating. It is slowly exploding and coming apart. And that's one way to describe it. So I've lost control of my ability to write that particular part of my story. Just about the time, and that's what really, can piss you off, just about the time you get control of your life and wrest it away from religion, ALS comes along and says, no, you're not going to get to write your story. I'm going to tell you how this goes. But it's not, because while ALS can take my body, it can't take my mind, it can't take my will, it can't take my desire. And so we had to decide early on, how are you going to react to this, Dave? What's going to be the way that you react to ALS? And Bevan and I have gotten to know many people over the years who've had ALS, who've gotten diagnosed. Some before me, some since mine. Some people we've gotten to know who've already passed away. It's hard, but we've also seen in like communications with them and things that they post online, not everybody reacts to it the same way. You can get angry, you can get depressed, you can get courageous. You can say, no, I'm not giving into this. I'm going to fight it. And many do. And that's kind of what I decided to do. I'm not fighting it in the typical way of, there's really no way to fight it medically. They don't have any treatments or cures. There's stuff that comes along every now and then, drugs that indicate in some people that may have some slight benefits. So we'll try those and we'll do that. But that's not, we're not pinning our hopes on that. We're not screaming at the top of our lungs, this is going to save me. Because at the end of the day, we don't think it is. I think I came to the conclusion pretty early in the process that I could choose two ways to approach this. One would be to spend my time and energy and focus and desire on trying to stay alive. And the other would be to spend time, energy, focus, and desire on living. And I pretty quickly decided I wanted to try to do the latter. And so that's why we've been going everywhere we can, some for leisure to see places that are beautiful, like the Grand Canyon in Hawaii that I hadn't gotten to before, to do adventures like skydiving, and did that, and scuba diving, prior to which I jumped out of a helicopter into the water because what do I have to live? And then while scuba diving, I get to play with an octopus, which was an unbelievable adventure and experience, just a beautiful, surreal moment. So we've been going for the moments, but we're also speaking up about living and dying. And that's my way. The only way I know how to react to anything is to talk about it, because that's about all I can do is talk and drink water. Through a straw, of course. And that's why we decided to do the dying out loud stuff and to talk about living and dying and making the most of every moment you have. We have a phrase called "It's all about the moments," because if you analyze what life really is, it's nothing but a collection of moments. You don't remember the days or the weeks or the months of your life. You remember the moments. That moment when something spectacular happened, or that beautiful conversation with a wonderful friend, or a sunset with a glass of bourbon and a cigar. Those are my kind of moments. You may have other kind, but the moments are what you remember. And that's what life is. It's not a great big plan that God designed. It's just random, chaotic moments. And what we have to do with them, what we must do with them, is capture them, make the most of them. Don't miss them. Don't let life pass us by. When we get to the end of it, you've heard the phrase saying, we don't regret what we did, we regret the things we didn't do. Say yes. So I've had people tell me, they message me and they say, you know what? I've learned to say yes to more things after watching you. I get messages all the time. And it's very gratifying to know that the things I've been talking about, the things that are important to me, have resonated with people in ways that are tangibly helpful to them. It means everything to me, because I feel like when ALS came and tried to steal my life away, that I've been able to take something back from it and say, no, not yet. No, not yet. I've got some things to say. I've got some things to do. I've got some places to be, and I'm not going to let you take that from me yet. Now, it is coming. It's happening. It's relentless. It doesn't give up. But I'm going to keep doing this and doing everything I can to make the most of the moments and to do things that make a difference. So what we decided to do this year, 2023, is I had a YouTube show I was doing for about a year and a half called That GD Show. And you might think it's that goddamn show, but it's really not. It's Genevieve and Dave. She was my co-host. But it's a little play on words. But we quit doing that a few months ago because I felt like I needed to focus on a couple of things before I ran out of time that I had to get done. One is write another book, and this will be called Dying Out Loud. And the subtitle is probably going to be what dying taught me about living. And it'll be a lot of the things I've been talking about, and messages I've gotten from people, conversations I've had with people, people I've met all around the world, actually. And it's amazing the conversations you can have. Like someone will come up to and say, what's your shirt all about? And that'll start a conversation. If I'm in the mood for it. If I'm not, it's just, I'll say it's something I got at Goodwill. And then I'll drink my coffee and on I go. But if I'm in the right mood and I want to talk about living and dying with them, then I'll say, well, it's this. And then we'll get into a conversation and people's eyes go, whoa. And, or if you're just randomly out and people find out you have a terminal disease, it'll open a lot of conversations about death and dying and living and those kind of things. So we've really wanted to make that conversation, more people to get involved in that conversation. We're in the process of starting a nonprofit foundation, a 501c3, and it's called, similar to Dying Out Loud, it's called I Am Dying Out Loud. And I'll tell you more about that title in a minute. But what essentially we're doing is the mission statement is pretty simple, and I may have it not completely memorized, but it goes something like this: to enhance the quality of life by removing unwanted religious overreach in the process of healthcare, death, and dying, and providing bucket list moments for people with terminal illnesses. Pretty close, huh, Deb? Bev? First part of that is this: there's too much religion involved in healthcare, in hospice care, in dying, in death. We've heard story after story of people who've had unwanted religious proselytization in hospitals with them, with their parents, with their loved ones. We're going to get involved in that and hold hospitals and medical facilities accountable to not doing that. Now, if someone wants prayer, if they want a religious chaplain, knock yourself out. Pray all you want to the non-existent God that you believe in. We're going to say, if you don't want that, though, we don't want you to be put in the position of having to be defensive about that. You shouldn't have someone coming to you and saying, what kind of church do you go to? Would you like a chaplain to visit you? We're going to provide people with tools so that when they are in medical situations, hospitals, hospices, you have the tools in your hand, like a living will, if you will, where you hand them this. This is my directive on religious content involving me. What I don't want, what I do want. No one should have to be defending themselves against people trying to push religion in those vulnerable situations, which is what they do. This is where they prey on people. And this should not be the default position in the healthcare system, that everyone wants a chaplain. No, everyone doesn't want a chaplain. Everyone doesn't want you to pray for them. Everyone doesn't want you to tell them you're praying for them. And we want to raise the bar on that and call attention to that. The second part of that nonprofit is to provide bucket list moments, trips and experiences for people diagnosed with ALS and other terminal diseases similar to that, motor neuron diseases. There was an organization that did that for us for the Hawaii trip to go scuba diving. And it's hugely important, and it cuts to the heart of our mission statement with Dying Out Loud, if you will, that it's all about the moments. And when someone has been given a terminal diagnosis, the moments become all the more important. And we want someone who has been given that death sentence to have an opportunity to experience a moment they maybe had always wanted to do. And it could be simple, like recently someone reached out to me his mom has ALS, and he wondered how I could help him provide her with something that would be meaningful to her. And so we talked about it, and he said she would probably most enjoy a European culinary tour. The only problem is she's too far gone to really experience that in Europe. It takes a lot to travel to foreign countries with a disease like ALS when you need help with everything. So we're looking at the idea of going to like New York City, which has a lot of European restaurants, and doing a tour for a weekend of the city and providing that for her as a bucket list experience. Those are the kind of things. It can be anything from that to jumping out of a helicopter to play with an octopus. But the point is, we want to be an organization that does that as a secular atheist organization, so that people will have to recognize that atheists are not bad people. They can be generous and kind and compassionate, just like any other definition of a person. And so that's why I believe, as far as I know, there's no other organization that identifies itself that way. And we feel like that's a place that we can fill and a niche that we can fill. And then as well as the pushing back against religious overreach in medical fields, that's another area that we don't see as being addressed. And we've been talking to other secular organizations. We had an opportunity to be in DC at the Secular Coalition for America and present to them, and every one of them said, yes, this is a need that's not being addressed. So we're glad you're filling this space. So we're in the process of putting that together. We're forming a board, getting the bylaws written. We've got our 501c3 filed. We've got the EIN number. We're putting it in place. So encourage you to follow along with that. We'll have the website up as soon as we identify a web developer. Anybody here do that? We're always looking for help and looking for volunteers. So that's upcoming. The new book's upcoming, I hopefully. If you did want a copy of Childish Things, like I said, we didn't bring it, but happy to, if you wanted a signed copy, if that's not of interest to you, you can get it on Amazon. Or if you don't want to read it, don't get it. It's not mandatory. I'm having trouble signing things anymore. We do still provide signed books, but you won't be able to read what I write. You'll just know that Dave scribbled something on there, and then one day it'll be worth a lot of money. Probably not. But I am happy now to I'm sure I left some things out that I wanted to address, but I always like to give a lot of time for Q&A, because then we get to talk about the things you're interested in rather than you sitting there listening to me drone on about stuff you have no interest in. So I'll take trust me, there's no question that's off limits. There's probably no question I haven't been asked, but I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you have. And did we want to do mics for the questions, or we just yell them out? How about I just repeat the question? so everybody can hear it. Okay, yes, ma'am. I think everybody heard that, right? Did I ever think about returning to God when I got ALS? Yeah, I said, okay, God, just kidding about that atheism thing. Just kidding. Can we talk? And again, he didn't listen because he's not there. No, not for a nanosecond. Yeah, that's a question I've been asked quite a bit. In fact, it's gotten back. No one's ever said to me, did anyone say you got ALS because you left God? In case someone was going to ask that question. I've heard that they've said it, but it's never been said to my face. But that question has occurred to people. And no, when I came to the end of my faith, it was such a final thing. It was like, it's like you can't try to believe in Santa Claus again once you realize, oh, shit, he's not there. You can't unthink that. You can't unsee that. You can't go, okay, no, because it was such a clear conclusion that I came to. And so, no, when I got diagnosed, it was just like, okay, this is a thing now. It wasn't like I didn't get angry, like, well, why me? How, and I'm probably subverting other questions, but as a Christian, if I'd have gotten diagnosed as a Christian, it would have been much more complicated. As an atheist, it's just like random stuff happens. Life is random and chaotic. A certain number of people every year get diagnosed with ALS statistically. I think 5,000. I always get this wrong. I'm one of 5,000. As a Christian, I would have been trying to figure out, where's God in this? What's God saying? Why me, Lord? Are you testing me? Is it a lack of faith? Is there secret sin? Did I masturbate one too many times? What was it? But as an atheist, it's just me. I'm no more special than anybody up and down my road. Why would I think that it wouldn't be me? Instead of saying, why me? Why would I think it wouldn't be me? And that's, I think, a much simpler way to look at life. Life just happens. And we can be as careful as we can be and healthy as we can be, but still stuff's happened. And so I'm kind of glad the diagnosis came after my Christian years, because it would have been a lot more complicated mentally for me there. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. I converted myself to atheism. Well, yes and no. So to say that no outside influences brought me to that conclusion would probably be not accurate, because we all have outside influences. The things we see, the people we know, the conversations we have, the books we read. So no one led me, no one person. Like as a Christian, you can be led to the Lord and someone prays with you to receive Jesus. That's the person, then they get a notch in their belt for heaven. As no one like talked me into it, if that's what you're implying. No one came to me and said, hey, Dave, can't you got to know there's no God. Come on, man. It was me thinking through and studying the Bible, honestly, in a different way with an open mind and seeing the inconsistencies. For me, my faith was all about the Bible. And once the Bible became just a man-made book, the rest of the dominoes fell really fast. Well, I would disagree with your terminology, conversion to atheism. It's a deconversion is a term a lot of people use because they've been converted from one thing to another. We're all born atheists. We have to be programmed to believe in some kind of religious idea. So atheism is a lack of belief, not a belief. And so to convert to atheism to me sounds a little bit odd, because you're not converting to anything. You're basically saying, I don't believe in anything. A lot of people get that confused. And some people do call themselves an atheist with a definition of, I believe there's no God. That is a belief statement. And I don't really agree with that, because if you make a belief statement, then you have to back it up somehow. I rather say, I don't believe there's a God. That's not a belief statement. That's a reaction to a belief statement. So the commonalities I see is that people come to the place where they find that their faith doesn't have the evidence that they require of it. They see, for me, it was a lifetime of seeing God not show up and making excuses. And finally, I got tired of making excuses for his poor behavior. And so I said, well, fuck it. I'm going to quit excusing this guy. He's got to answer for himself. And of course he doesn't, because he's got no voice, because he's not there. But I do see a commonality with people that I've met over the years, like you said. And yeah, there's a lot of that they came to the place where they start examining their beliefs in a different way. Sometimes they'll run across a YouTube video or something that, whoa, wait a minute, I hadn't looked at this before. Or read a book or some conversation with a friend. But yeah, it's a commonality that I see there, that they're very similar stories, but none of them the same. Yes, ma'am, and I'll get you next. If my newfound freedom would have driven me to the bucket list that no, I think I may have gotten to some things, but I wouldn't have had the urgency. We always think we have more time, most of us. Yeah, I'll get to that next year. I'll work a little more and then retire with a little more, that kind of thing. And so I think I've been driven. Bevan will tell you I'm driven, because I keep her on the road all the time and no rest. And but I am driven. I am like, there's an urgency about everything. I get up every day with a sense of needing to get stuff done and go here, go there. Whereas honestly, it would be easier just to sit home where it's comfortable and there's a routine, and it's harder on the road. We have to navigate more difficulties and challenges. But I think the bucket list thing is more driven by my sense of running out of time. So I know everybody can't drop what they're doing and go fill bucket lists. I know that's not a reality, that people don't have the flexibility, the money, the time, whatever. But if you can, I guess what I try to say is, if you have the choice between saying yes, do a thing, or no, do a thing, ask yourself why you're saying no. What are you holding off for? What are you waiting for? You certainly don't want to work your whole life and work, and then retire and then get a terminal disease and say, what did I do this for? Just stuff to think about. Yes, sir. Oh boy. 37 years. Now, there were doubts all along the way, and I've been told that my book really highlighted that, because I put myself back in those years. I put myself back in 1973 when I got caught up in the Jesus movement, and 1980 something and 1990 something, and those experiences with people and with God that were questionable, and stuff where I felt like, okay, this isn't adding up. This faith that I'm supposed to have, this what the Bible says, and this thing that I'm experiencing are not adding up. And so I would have a moment of doubt. I'd have a window where I'm looking out and going, wait a minute, there's questions here. But then I'd stuff them down and get busy and move on and kind of double down and just, not think about it, honestly. But from the time I started seriously questioning it, where I came to the place where I said, okay, everything's on the table here. I'm going to look at scripture in a different way, and I'm going to see if it measures up. it was probably a process of about a year and a half of honest exploration, reading some books. I purposely avoided the classic atheist books by Hitchens and Dawkins and people like that. I didn't want another person to influence me, to your point. I wanted to think for myself and not be guided by some classic atheist. I did read books from people who looked at faith from different angles, where doubt wasn't demonized and those kind of things. So, but mostly it was me really examining the scripture and the history of Christianity and the church. And boy, don't look very deep into that unless you want to. Whew, that's not pretty. But it was about a year and a half all told until I realized I don't believe any of it anymore. Yes, Deloise.
We're at the final stage and you realize that you have a faith that you broke into the family. And to the children, especially, they really, didn't like to hear that. And you said briefly, looking back now, I might have done it differently. And how, and is that true? Am I
Yeah.
correct in saying that? Oh, that's the impression I had.
Yeah, I've said that a few times on different shows. I think you may have seen one of those or a few of those. Yeah, I'm kind of a I don't always think things through. I can be impulsive and reactionary. I remember thinking when I came to that conclusion, I remember thinking I owe it to the people who are close to me to tell them the truth. And I just felt like I would just lay it out there. My kids were all adults by this time. I think, yeah, all of them were married, actually. So they were out of the house and on their own. And so I was with my son on a golf trip and I broke it to him as we were driving. And he was quiet. He didn't have a big reaction. I could tell he was just processing it. And I didn't, I probably could have said it in different ways than just saying, I don't believe any of it, or I'm an atheist. I just kind of was a bit more blunt than I should have been, probably. I should have kind of eased into it a bit more and not as matter of fact, because I raised all of them with my wife to be Christians, to be very devoted to their faith. And they were, all of them were. My son and his wife, they've since come to the conclusion on their own, not for my influence, that they don't believe anymore. They kind of hold to an idea of a God of some sort, but they don't hold to the Christian idea of a God. My two daughters still are very much Christian, and one of them still is disconnected from me. The other we go from here to see in a few days. They cut me off for a good bit afterwards, after I told them. It was just their way of dealing with the hurt. They were influenced by a pastor who encourages that kind of shunning. I talk about that a lot in my book. It was very, very harmful, very hurtful, a very difficult few years. And I wrote a letter to a very long, detailed letter to my closest friends. And so when I say I could have done it a little different way, I could have landed the plane a little more gently than I did, and probably not encountered as much pushback. But there's no manual for this. I didn't know what to do. First of all, I didn't know a single other person on the planet that had been through it. It's incredibly lonely feeling to do that. And this was back in 2011. The internet existed, but there wasn't the plethora of resources that exist now. There wasn't dozens and hundreds of YouTube shows and podcasts of this kind of thing, and people sharing their stories. I found the Clergy Project online, and that was my first connection to other people and talking to Dan Barker. And that was my entrance into finding other people who could identify with it. But prior to that, I was just groping in the dark. So, I've encouraged people since then to be a little more gentle with how you handle, especially your family members. I do think it's important to be authentic and honest, but you have to do that on your own, in your own timing, and in a way that's palatable to the listener. So that's this, we've been able to navigate that since then. Well, my one oldest daughter has opened up the door for a relationship again. My middle daughter hasn't, and there's nothing I can do about that. It's just on her. She's got to handle this the way that she needs to. But yeah, I could have been a little gentler, I guess, is the simple answer to that. Yes, sir. I don't understand your question at all. Alex Murdaugh, the guy that was convicted of murdering his daughter and his son. What's that got to do with this tonight? I consider that a myth to begin with, that there is a God and there was a Jesus who he killed. So what is your question? Do I think people should support the myth of Christianity? No. No, I don't. That's why I talk about the things I talk about. I think Christianity is a harmful religion that's done great damage to a great number of people, fundamentalism especially. I agree with what Hitchens says. Religion poisons everything. It's designed to control and manipulate people, usually by fear and guilt. Thank you. I think there's other questions that other people, then I'll get back to you. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Hi. Yeah, again, I don't purport to know a lot about other religions. The water I swam in was fundamentalist Christianity. So I really try to limit my observations and ideas to that. But I do understand there are some types of religion that are less coercive and controlling, that don't really adhere to a God, like Hinduism, I think you mentioned. I think Judaism, as far as I know, they've got traditions to the Abrahamic God, but they don't try to impose that. In fact, you can't really join them. Uh, they don't let anybody in. So I think that you can be a humanist in that regard, where it's about the value system, and most religions dictate the value system that you have to live by. For any religion that doesn't, then it probably leaves you freedom to dictate your own value system, which can be humanism. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And again, I'm not an expert, so, take it for what it's worth. Yes.
me that, you know, you're having a good time now, you're scheming a lot. But, you know, when you're 70, when you're 70 or when you're 70 or 80, you're going to think the same way. Why don't you think that you're not invulnerable, but you know, you're going to be in the same reality and go back. You've got to live in the moment. And I appreciate that. The older I get.
Yeah. It's a challenge talking to young people because they think they're going to live forever. You know, there's the sense of they're invincible. And I'm out, you know, I've been thinking about when I go to Secular Student Alliance, the conference, and they're a bunch of 20-year-olds. Are they going to even, you're all going to die one day? Yeah. Oh man, whatever. I thought that way. I mean, you know, it's hard to get them to see that. But I guess we just have to hold to the idea of and continue to talk about the reality that this is the one shot we have, and make sure you're writing your own story. Make sure that no one's writing it for you, and that you are getting what you want out of it. And that, you know, that's not hedonism or nihilism. It's just the reality that I'm the one who's responsible for my life. And if we can help young people embrace that, then we've given them a little bit of a head start, I think. Are you? Well, let me know how that goes. Yeah. No, it's once we come to terms with the fact we're going to die, then we can get about living. That's been said before, and it's really true. Yes, ma'am. My very first, she asked, explain your first symptoms of your ALS. My very first symptom was I was having trouble forming certain numbers and letters when I was writing. I was in the insurance business and filled out a lot of forms all the time, and I had trouble with fine motor skills in my fingers, and then buttoning buttons and opening packages. Those were the first signs that something was wrong. And then that progressed into weakness with my hands, mostly my fingers. Like bowling one time, I couldn't pick the bowling ball up with your fingers like you're supposed to, so I cradled it and shoved it down the aisle and tried to laugh and make them think I was the way I did it. Trying to hit a golf club, which is what I'd done for years, and I couldn't get the strength in my fingers, so I was kind of wrestling it like that. There were signature moments like that, but the progression, the very first symptom was in the fingers. And it took me several months. I had symptoms. I was diagnosed in February of 2019, but I had symptoms as I looked back. You know, you look backwards because you don't know what's going on in the moment. But I had symptoms probably 6 to 8 months before that. So I've probably been living with ALS in my body for about 5 years now. Yes, sir. Why not be Muslim just in case? That's Pascal's wager, and it's fallacious and phony. I mean, it's like you can make yourself believe something. It's like you're going to try to trick God. And okay, God, I know I really don't believe in you, but just in case you're real, let's you and me make this deal. That's essentially what they're asking you to do. And they know if you throw it at them and say, well, why don't you be Muslim just in case? What if they're right and you're wrong? There's more of them than you. So, you know, if we're looking at numbers, they don't like it when you say that. Yeah, but I'm right, is what they'll say. That's what they say. They're right. They fly planes into buildings. They're so sure they're right. Have you done anything like that? That's, I've been on too many call-in shows, y'all. Well, you don't choose to be an atheist. It's a conclusion you come to. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I know.
Well, thank you.
Theologians doesn't even bother asking certain questions. I asked you guys earlier tonight. And I have been studying, this didn't come out of church, I've been studying. In the Bible, did Paul and Jesus believe the same in salvation?
Paul created Christianity. Jesus didn't. Jesus was, if he existed at all, a failed prophet, essentially. There were many of them in that day, and they would gather a following, and then they would either get killed or they would just lose their following to some shinier prophet, you know, the new best prophet on the scene. In terms of salvation, Paul's writings kind of crystallized that they're not synonymous. They contradict each other. If you look at what Paul says you need to do to be saved and what Jesus says different things all the time. He said, "Follow me" at one point. He said, "Whoever treats people right will go to heaven, and the others will go to hell." He was saying different things at different times. I think because whoever was writing a particular gospel was trying to communicate a different thing. There's no way that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John know what Jesus said. They weren't taking notes. They wrote things down 30, 40, 50 years later, 60 years later in some cases. So there's no way anybody really knows what Jesus said. Paul's letters are more accurate in terms of their documentation and historicity, although there's only fragments of them left. So we don't really know, but clearly they weren't all articulating. In other words, I think if someone just read through the New Testament and you were to ask them if they knew nothing about faith or Christianity, had no indoctrination whatsoever, an alien landed on the planet, and you said, "Here, read the New Testament and tell me what you have to do to be saved," at the end of it, they'd look at you and go, "I have no fucking idea." Because there's not a clear message. Oh, yeah. Just believe. That's what I was talking about. Yeah.
But he did say, John 3:16.
And you got to be born of the Spirit. And so that's what I'm saying. There's conflicting messages there. There's no clear salvation message in the New Testament. That's why there's 3,000 denominations, all telling you they have it right. That's right. Well, love them and hate the sin, you know. Yes, ma'am. Oh. Okay. Well, here I am. No, you're fine.
To think dying in heaven is so wonderful. Why do you suppose it is? They're not eager to die. Nobody seems to want to die. Who's underneath? Don't believe some of the stuff they proselytize and
I've wondered that myself because as I've been talking about it, the people I have found to be the most fearful of it are the Christians. And I have a theory. As a Christian, you're taught that you're not really gonna die. It's a pause, it's a comma. Death has been defeated by the cross, you're told. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. So Jesus came along to die for us. So we don't really die. We go to sleep, we wake up with Jesus, we dance through the clouds for eternity, singing Hosanna. I don't know anything that could sound more boring, honestly, seriously. But it's supposed to be awesome. So, whoo! I think when you're told over and over that you're not really going to die, when you're confronted with the actual reality of it, you feel like maybe you've been fooled. Because when you're in the hospital bed, you know you're going to die. Or, I mean, obviously those who have accidents and aren't thinking about it, it just happens and there's no thought process. But the vast majority of people have events that lead up to it and plenty of time to think about it in those last months and years in some cases. And so I think for Christians who've been told their whole life that you're really not going to die, the reality of it trumps that, although I hate to use that word, but oh God, it just threw up in my mouth. But I think that's part of what it is, because they don't want to talk about it. They run from it. Even my friends and family who are Christians, they don't want to talk about my ALS. They don't act like they're going to be there for me when it's near the end. But my atheist friends have. They've embraced it. And they've not run away from it. They've run toward it. And they've not that they're anxious for it, but that they want to experience all of my life before my death, because that's what matters. And atheists and all of us, and that's another thing we've been talking, and we talk about death with dignity and some of the laws that need to happen, and how we die, and how we die poorly in America. We treat our pets better than we treat our people. I just actually pulled out of a conference in Canada that I spoke at last year. I'm supposed to speak at this year. And I just told them I'm not coming because I found out that they use part of their proceeds to support a hospice that's connected with the Catholic Church, and actually doesn't allow for medical assistance in dying MAID, which is legal in Canada. Once I found that out, I confronted the organizers and I told them I can't be a part of this. And I reached out to fellow speakers, friends of mine, and told them, these are well-known speakers who the conference is built upon. I said, I don't understand why you're supporting this hospice. Well, it's not really connected to the Catholic Church. It is on the internet, on their website. It clearly says they don't offer MAID because of their Catholic beliefs. That's pretty clear to me. So that's contrary to everything I stand for. And so we have to change the conversation about death and not make it, take the mystery away from it. Quit making it a fearful, mysterious thing. It is something we are all going to do sooner or later. And as soon as we can start talking about the stuff I hear the most from people, or as much as anything, is helping them confront their fear of death, helping them come to terms with the reality of it, start talking about it, start living as though you're dying, start not being afraid of it, just wrestling it and realizing, okay, yeah, I'm going to die now. Now, what? How do I live? What do I do in the meantime? What's the quality of my life going to be? What's my story going to be? And death is not the be-all, end-all bad boogeyman. And I like what Dylan Thomas says, do not go gentle into this good night. Go out loud like I'm doing, dying out loud. That's how to do it. Talk about it. Don't be afraid of it. Go down swinging. And it's not like, I'm not the death merchant. Just I love talking about dying. Bevan wishes I'd quit talking about it so much. But it's important to just keep it out in the open. Don't be afraid of it. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's not living that we should be afraid of. And when you think about death, it's not the scary boogeyman. It's the end of life, but you go to sleep and you don't wake up. Period. You don't realize you didn't wake up. You're not, you're just not aware of anything. To the best of our knowledge, we think that's what happens. So it's the not living that I'm afraid of. It's the missing out. I've got serious FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't want to miss a thing. And so that's what we should focus on. What are we getting out of it? So I think it's the lack of a rational understanding of death that the Christians have that causes them, therefore, to be afraid of it more than the secular person does. That's my theory. I don't really know. Answer your question? Well, it's the best I can come up with. I don't really know because they don't know. They don't know. If I was to ask a Christian, why are you afraid of death? They would deny that they are. But clearly their actions and their attitude about it indicate they are. Yes, sir.
I have. I look at.
Yeah.
Shouldn't do this thing, but there's nothing to prevent it, you know, and bring the say, look at God. God is the ultimate judge, and He will take care of making sure that you act morally. How do you? What would you argue?
Oh boy. How long you have? I think, well, we can't, I think we'd lose the room if we did that. I've actually had that conversation. I see you. Hang on. I've actually had that conversation multiple times with these college shows I do and in person. There's a couple of quick responses I usually give. Number one is, if you're God, you serve a God who, when he wrote the top 10 things for 10 commandments, couldn't find a place for don't own other people. If he couldn't find a place for slavery, then don't talk to me about morality. Okay. So we're done with you. The second thing is, if the only thing keeping you from raping and murdering someone is your belief in God, please keep believing. We're all better off because of that. And I like what Penn Jillette says. I don't believe in God, and because of that, I kill and rape as many people as I want, which is zero. I don't want to do that because I'm a good person, and we don't need God to be a good person. And people rely on that argument that there's no morality without God because they think that God is the author of morality, and they're terribly misinformed. And again, morality, not doing something because there's somebody watching you that's going to punish you if you do that thing, that's not morality. That's just obedience. There's nothing to do with morality. Morality is doing something because it's right when no one's watching.
I use that argument. Pastor, they asked him, would you kill me if God told you to?
Yeah.
And he said, you're asking the wrong question. The right question. He said, how do I know God is talking to me? Well, how do you know?
Exactly. Well, I had a caller on the show who was asked the question, if God told you to kill your son, as he supposedly did Abraham, would you do it? And he hemmed and hawed a while. Then he finally said, yes, I would. And I said, well, I feel sorry for you because you are a better person than your theology. Your theology is horrible. And he was a good guy. He just was misinformed and had bad ideas. Is that it? Y'all good? All the questions have been answered. All the knowledge has been dispensed. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Efforts to happen, so humans in Tallahassee, especially Warren Rockman, who handled this technology.
Thank you, Warren.
Obviously, engineering the work virtue, space, the freedom of sport, their help, the SSA, and special thanks to Bellamy Leonard who helped put this together.
You got the ball rolling.
That's it.
Yeah, we're good.
And if you still want to party on, we are going to be at El Jalisco, on Monroe, just kind of over there. So 2022 North Monroe. So yeah, I'm gonna hang out there. What? Is that?
If you want to party on later, we'll go to Hooters, right?
El Jalisco. Hooters.
Just look for the Hooters. Thank you, everybody. It really is my honor to be here tonight. Thank you for having me.